Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast. I am super excited to be sharing with you this conversation that I had with my collaborator, my dear friend Britten LaRue. And as many of you may know, Britten and I are launching a course starting September 10th called Astrology as Praxis. So Astrology as Praxis really is a year-long container, obviously to learn astrology, right? That should be obvious from the title. But it's really divided into two parts. So the first part, for the first 4 months, we're going to be learning the building blocks of astrology, right? We're going to be learning the syntax, the grammar of astrology, how to get fluent and how to be able to start using astrology. And then in the second half of the journey, we are really going to be unpacking everything that we've learned. We are going to be spitting it out and investigating it. We're going to be questioning it. We're going to be integrating it back into our lives. And yeah, I truly believe that each person comes into this world with their own personalities, their own backgrounds, their own interests, their own skill sets. If you are feeling called to astrology, why should astrology look the same to you as it looks to everyone else? Really? And our hope is to create a container where you can really explore with the support of community, with the support of mentors, what astrology will look like for you and how you're going to use astrology. Because I can tell you from the get-go that I cannot tell you how your practice is going to look. Your practice is going to be so unique to you. Your practice is going to be completely your own. And so we are very upfront about that. And we want to assist you. We want to create a space where you can feel excited, held, and supported in figuring what that looks like for you. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the curriculum of Astrology as Praxis. Now, it's interesting because even as I was saying the word curriculum, what was coming up to my mind was kind of this feeling of like, oh, that's so schoolish. I wish that was a better word. But something that Britten has helped me understand throughout the past few years that we've been working together, especially when I was a student, but also when I was facilitating alongside Britten, is that there's such magic in curriculum. Let's think about this a little bit further, right? A curriculum really is a crystallization, a solidification of the experiences, the embodied successes and mistakes and learnings and wisdoms that the facilitators have experienced throughout their process of learning the thing, right? That is kind of unique to them. If you go hiking and there's like a hiker's map, but maybe other hikers who have hiked before you created their own notes next to the map, I kind of think of curriculum like that. Like there's something about knowing that you have a map for this journey, right? Which, the journey itself is going to be full of unpredictability, right? But knowing that there's a curriculum is going to get you into a rhythm and get you into a space where there is some sort of roadmap. And that's going to help you relax into truly enjoying your process, right? And along the way, there might be things that the facilitator truly understand as a necessary part to learning whatever it is that you're learning. And so this curriculum is interesting because the process of kind of channeling down the curriculum was pretty easeful, actually. Both of us have been talking, we've been exchanging ideas back and forth about what kind of container we want to create. what energetics are we trying to impart to the students? We are fully aware that we're not just teaching materials, right? We're not just imparting intellectual knowledge, but we're also imparting something else. We're imparting our approach, the way that we relate to astrology, the way that astrology makes sense to us, the way that astrology has taught us in our lives, right? That, as facilitators, it's impossible not to be imparting these things. It's not possible to just be transferring information as if information is like this dry thing, right? Because we're humans. And so when we started to really think about how we want to create the curriculum, we also brought into the curriculum this idea that we also went through the process of learning astrology. We went through the process of figuring out who we are as astrologers. We went through the process of figuring out which part of astrological techniques, or maybe even which astrological tradition is for us and which ones are not for us, right? And so in that process, we recognize that, hey, there were actually things that we wish we had as students that we didn't have, because either, maybe our facilitators or our teachers are just different humans, right? Our teachers maybe didn't have some of the same obstacles or some of the same interests, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But our hope in creating this container and creating this learning experience is to be able to address that, right? So that someone who's out there who may be walking a path similar to us as emerging astrologers will maybe certain parts of their path will be a little bit more easeful than it was for us. That was really kind of the hope and the intention behind it. And so I really feel like astrology as praxis is obviously wonderful for beginners who have perhaps not really studied astrology seriously, but felt such deep resonance with astrology that they may want to invest a year of their time learning astrology. These days, let's just be honest, you have YouTube, you have Instagram. If you're not so serious about it, then you're likely good with just reading memes, right? With just watching reels, or like maybe, there are even some podcasts out there that are just incredible, right? But truly this course is for those wanting an experience, wanting to be in community, wanting to be held, by that curriculum, by us, Britten and I as mentors, by Jacqueline and Nicole, who's part of our community support team, and by the rest of the community, right? Who wants to be witness in that communal learning experience. And what I will say too is that I feel that astrology as praxis will be incredible for astrologers who are kind of still figuring out their practice. Astrologers for whom their practice still feels like maybe not quite their own, like something's not quite right about astrology and about how you practice astrology, despite the fact that maybe you've taken foundational astrological courses before and that you have a good enough grasp of the knowledge, of the vocabulary, but something about it is like, a great analogy, I think, is, when you learn Spanish in high school, but then you have never really gone to a Spanish-speaking country, or you haven't had a chance to really practice your Spanish, and so you're kind of stuttering, you're not sure, and you're not really feeling the lingo, you're not feeling the spirit of speaking Spanish. I think that if you feel like that towards astrology, this container will be fabulous for you. So definitely check out our course page down in the show notes if that resonates. And also in the show notes, you will find the link to my calendar, because I'm going to be doing something. I'm going to be offering 30 minutes one-on-one calls with me for those of you who would like to connect. And really, the intention and the heart behind offering this is I know, as someone who is an avid adult student who has been in a lot of spaces, that committing to a year-long journey is a big investment, right? If it's not big for you in terms of financial, it will be big for you in terms of energetic. If it's not big for you in terms of energetic investment, it will be huge for you in terms of your time investment, right? And so no matter which way you cut it, I imagine that some of you who are listening to this and who are like, yes, give me that, will have some concerns and will have some doubts about whether this container is right for you. And personally, for me, being in the student seat or having been in a student seat, my preference is to actually sit down with the facilitator of the course that I'm going to be taking and just feeling out, whether there's like a somatic resonance there, seeing if this person and I have chemistry, because it's really important. You don't want to be stuck in a container where you're not going to like the facilitator. That maybe you've been listening to my podcast and you're like, oh, this person's pretty cool, but then you sit with me and you're like, nah. So so really the point of these conversations is for your service. I'm really opening up my time, opening up the space in case you have any questions, you have any doubts, and we can talk about them. And, maybe within the first 30 seconds, you're like, I'm good. I really want to do this. And then we can just chat, the rest of the time, which is great too. I am open to meeting with you and to hearing about your concerns and to hearing what's going on in your mind. I'm here for you. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns that you want to talk about, you can book some time with me. Okay. So without further ado, let me transition you over to my conversation with Britten on the curriculum magic for astrology as praxis.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Britten.
I am so excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, curriculum.
Yes, we know it.
Nerd alert.
Nerd alert.
Teacher for life.
I love it.
Oh, I've just been waiting for the curriculum conversation. So, you ready to get into it?
Let's do this.
I feel like the most appropriate way to begin thinking about a curriculum conversation is to just step back a bit and ask each other, how do you relate to curriculum or syllabus? You've taken a lot of classes. You love learning. What does the curriculum offer you in your learning experience? How do you know when you've landed upon a curriculum that you feel like is almost like a work of art,
Yeah.
Like, in what ways is the curriculum itself creating the learning environment for you in ways that you find exciting as you make one right now,
Yeah. To me, what's coming up is actually this idea of a curriculum being alive. Like when I start to talk about the things from that curriculum or the things that I learned about being in that container outside of the container, that's when I know things are working. There's something to be said about creating a very emergent kind of learning path where maybe, we feel it month by month, depending on what the students need. And also at the same time, when I look back at experiences that are like that, it tends to be with teachers who are holding the space energetically so powerfully. So it's like curriculum to me is not just intellectual, but there's also like an energetic component to it too, right? Mm-hmm. And so a curriculum to me, a great curriculum, right, is almost like a slow reveal of like, this is actually the thing that you came here for. Like, this is the whole feast, right? But it's like, I think curriculums need to really honor the fact that we need time to learn. And maybe it's like we need time to learn, but we also don't want it to be too much time. Like there's the right pace to eating.
Yes.
Yeah. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I feel like I do think about creating curriculum as a creative endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Is I think it's one of the most fun things to do for me in my life. I've made many curriculum, many syllabi in my life. And yeah, I like to think about the curriculum not as an ordering of information or like an ordering of just like things people will receive from you that will like go into their intellectual banks, but
Mm.
like how to create an experience. It's like, what kind of experience do I want this to be? So yeah, there's like either like hosting an experiential space where yes, pacing can also change, right? Like sometimes maybe it slows down, sometimes it speeds up, sometimes like the music, you change the music a little bit, like maybe you adjourn to another room and the vibe totally changes. Like
Mm.
thinking about it from this kind of this perspective of like what do I want this experience to feel like? And so order does matter, pacing does matter. And I think so then so much of a curriculum is about empathy and like in the sense of like feeling into another person's experience of maybe something that you haven't been a beginner at in a long time, or
Mm.
maybe you're feeling into providing an experience no one ever gave you, and
Right.
so, like you're kind of imagining what it feels like and thinking through all the little details to kind of like shift the lighting around, like play it like, oh, I could add that a little bit differently over there, and also thinking about different people in the space, different needs in the space, desires in the space. And like sometimes these folks may feel more turned on, so to speak, by the experience. And then other times maybe you're playing it a little bit more in other ways so that other needs and other desires can feel attuned to. And yes, all of these things can go into curriculum. And I love your phrasing, this is the thing you came here for, because I think a really magical aspect of curriculum building is like you have the thing that you're presumably teaching
Mm-hmm.
or like ostensibly teaching and allegedly, but like they're also being like this under teaching, this subtext teaching that begins to slowly unfold as like the super juice or like the super thing that nobody was expecting underneath it. And that's when things really get fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. That to me is so scorpionic. It's almost like there is that undertone of like, here's the good stuff, but you gotta wait till you get there. You know?
Yeah, keep people, you're entertained until you begin to realize like there's this other thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like kind of a dual thing to me in um, promoting that curriculum or talking about that curriculum before it's actually happening, because there's the thing you're ostensibly talking about doing, and then like you're already in the beginning phases of like kind of teasing this really special thing that will be revealed over time
Yeah.
that maybe isn't something that someone might even know they want yet.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I think what's interesting about, thinking about astrology as praxis, this new thing we're building, I do think that a lot of these subtext, almost covert teachings we are bringing out into the forefront and
Yeah.
allowing people to really wrestle with that concept like, early on,
That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're being pretty open about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, clearly we're making a podcast about it. We were joking
Right.
just before we started this that this is basically a recording of one of our business meetings.
Yes. Why not just lay it bare?
Yeah, and I think there's something about this particular curriculum too. We really wanted to create a robust container, right? Which I know is a word we're going to be talking about more in a second and exploring more. But we really want to create a robust container so that it's not just our work as facilitators to kind of, help the transformation process for participants, but the curriculum itself has its own rhythm, has its own like animating life force that works through us all slightly differently, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned since I've become a more openly magical teacher that it's pretty incredible how the course itself, the being of the course, the framework of the course can really do the magic with each participant without me needing to get myself involved in people's unfolding and people's transformation process. And I think that's really beautiful for keeping a clean, crisp, present time relationship between teacher and participant.
I love that.
It keeps a contract with participants that I feel better about.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So when we were in the process of turning to this new idea that we had, this new course we wanted to create together, at the beginning, right, it's like blank canvas. We didn't know how long we wanted it to be, right? Like, where do we begin? And I felt so held by what feels like the Virgo rising part of you that wanted to create this Google Doc to help us and hold us in these early processes of dreaming. And you created those incredible journaling prompts.
Yeah.
Do you want to share like how maybe that unfolded for you?
Sure. I mean, for me, living with this Virgo rising brain is like very particular, no pun intended. It's like, I feel like a lot came through for me all the time. Like I'm always getting downloads, informations, and it's like a 24/7 experience, And so I have found personally for myself, without bringing things down and writing things down in like Word documents or wherever I'm writing things down, systematizing them in some way, things get kind of, I don't know, things get lost, and sometimes I like being lost too, but I know that for this container and knowing that we are both very Jupiterian, Neptunian people, I want to be sure that we are writing things down, because I have found over time that when we start, building things or allowing things to be concrete, if that's a starting point, then there's a lot of juice that can come out of that, Yes. So the journaling prompts really, I think, grew out of my own Akashic practice. And something that I have found in my Akashic practice, at least at the time when I was sharing this document with you, was that it was a lot easier for me to channel and to feel into information, whether intellectual or energetic, if I had the questions in front of me. And I'm really enjoying this whole process of like inquiry. And something that was motivating those journaling prompts was really to investigate more deeply our own personal relationships, as well as our relationship as a group, as in Britten and Jonathan, to astrology at this point in our lives. Something that came up as we were ending charting your course was this idea that you had mentioned about, maybe that course container, that curriculum starting to feel like a jacket that's too small for you, or that no longer resonates with you. And that was kind of, I think, what I was responding to, because I really want us to come into this container as present time Jonathan and Britten, And to me, like, what better way than to journal or to channel information or to ask the tarot using these questions to get deeper and to get more familiar with the heart of the question, really, of who are we as astrologers today, and what are we here to share with others, right? Because a part of my facilitation experience in charting your course also has to do with me maybe sharing information that I've just learned, but I haven't fully integrated. And then afterwards, I'm like, ooh, maybe that's not something that I want to share at this moment in my journey, So I want to have a lot of clarity. I want to have a lot of discernment, which is a very Virgoan word, of like, where am I today as an astrologer? In what ways can I really show up as a facilitator? And what are the ways that I don't want to show up as a facilitator,
Yes. Yes. And so each of these journaling, and of course, for me as an Aries rising, this is months ago, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of questions. A lot of questions. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. Like, I don't know how to answer all these. But it was like, okay, I'm going to trust this. And I mean, those questions are so rich. You see, you had astrology as a personal practice. Do you want to read some of them?
Sure.
Feel fun?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, so I had a few different sections here. I had astrology as a personal practice, astrology as ancestral practice, astrology as student-teacher practice, astrology as communal practice, and then astrology as collaborative practice, which was something you added. And so, for example, I'm going to see what are some of the most juicy questions here? So astrology as personal practice, I wrote, or this is the question that came through. What are your highest dreams and visions as a keeper of the sacred tradition of astrology, for yourself, for your creations, for your students?
So good.
And then another one that I also like. How do you know if something is true only for you and your birth chart versus if something is generally true? And I put that in air quotes. So just a lot of like very juicy questions. And I think also what I will add about these questions too, as I'm reading them now, is I'm realizing that one of the things I'm really passionate about, for me, I'm like a bit of a philosopher astrologer, I think, because I'm really interested in understanding what are the underlying frames of thinking and ways of being and ontologies, cosmologies that underlie how we relate to astrology. Is there a difference between something being true to my birth chart versus something being generally true? Or is that just something that is created by, our scientific method culture, right? That's something that I'm really interested in, like, figuring out, and I'm particularly interested in figuring it out through very mystical means. So like in meditation or like through tarot and things like that, rather than like asking a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what happened from there is that my personality, the way I like to process, I wanted to send you audio through. So we began using WhatsApp as a like holder, a keeper, shall we say, a keeper of our dreamings and questions and ideas and suggestions. And I think it was at this point then that we started to lob things back and forth in between Zoom conversations. And it was through these sharings that we started to really start to feel the spirit of the space coming through.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was also through these voice memos that we begin feeling into like what are some of the emergent no's, right, in our collaboration? What are some of the ways? Because I think what's so beautiful about sharing these voice memos is that there's an opportunity for me to feel into not just what you are saying, like the content, but almost like how you're saying it, and then to observe, because we're doing it, not inside real time, right? Like sometimes I listen to your message like, a few hours after you sent it. There was space for us to feel into like what was coming up in my space, what was coming up in your space. And I think that also begin to set the tone for our collaboration, because I think as two, I don't know if you would resonate with this term, Britten, but like as two pretty sensitive, intuitive people, right? Like we have a lot of things come up and we're aware of it. And it's not necessarily conducive to the container or to our collaboration to not address that or to not really make space to talk about it.
Yes, exactly. I do think it was I think what would happen is it was almost like the WhatsApp space was where we would send like maybe a little more raw concepts, like raw feelings, raw coming throughs,
Yeah.
And then the Zoom conversations became pretty like seriously grounded work sessions.
Yeah.
Where we kind of had moved through some of the gnarly, like hadn't been totally digested things that we were swapping in between in the WhatsApp.
Totally.
And because I feel like it was through the tinkering that we then landed maybe in a Zoom session that one of the key things that we cared about for this container was honoring the learning process, and especially learning astrology process, which seems to really want there to be a lot of integration and processing and application, conversation, a lot of like attending to the post learning of the information to understand what it means to you,
Yeah.
And so how do we convey the information and offer these sort of processing, this beautiful processing that we wanted to have, and like how to set that up in a calendar, how to set it up in a curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of learning and unlearning and learning needing integration.
Yeah.
Both of these really concerned what we want to give those participating as an experience of astrology that we maybe didn't experience or haven't seen before.
Exactly. And something I would add to that is, astrology as praxis also came as an idea to me, as a title for a concept that I had, which is, what if we explore relationships with the planets completely without textbooks, completely without like the tradition part, and just channel and then see what happens. Like what kind of body of knowledge is going to be constellated if we just channel? But something that was pretty clear early on was that you had expressed your dis-ease with that, or discomfort with that idea, because you had said something that was very true for both of us, which is that we both came into astrology from that very nerdy place in our minds, right? We're both like so ravenous, like eating up all the information. So it felt really right to then begin adjusting like what Astrology as Praxis wanted to be into like, yes, a robust learning container where we bring in all of us, right? Like we bring in our brains, we bring in our emotions, we bring in our hearts, we bring in our intuition, we bring in our body.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And like we're also pretty open mystical about it. Because yes, when I was learning astrology, I was meditating and meeting the planets while kind of just doing that on my own, while also eating up texts, podcasts, trying to get my hands on anything that would give me the information.
Yes.
So yes. So when would you say that you first began to feel in this energetic, mystical way, a sense of like the being of the class being really present with us?
Yeah. It's interesting because I can't really think of like one moment, but if I have to assign one moment to it, it would be when Jupiter was passing through the degree of our suns. Mm-hmm. Because to me, that was really when the intention began. Because we had been having this conversation of like, oh, maybe we don't want to be collaborating anymore. And then on that day, we had this phone call and it was so beautiful because it was like, it became very clear to both of us that we still do want to collaborate. And what wanted to come through was like a new container out of that. And so I really feel like maybe if I have to assign one moment, it would be that. I think it started there. And it started with this intention of like, yeah, solidifying, right? Like bringing in more of the Saturnian element into something that we've both felt as like a shared sentiment around astrology, around how learning astrology needs to be with your whole being, and also can be done so beautifully through learning alongside other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the shape of the container itself was really a very Saturnian process of like, again, maybe one of us having an idea that feels exciting or fresh or new, and then sharing it with the other, and then letting the other bring something into it or edit it or multiply it or actually like chop it up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Recently you shared how you had this sense of us just pouring like gold or treasure. I can't remember what you said, pouring it into each other's court, just to go play around in it. We just we've just been passing things back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like I didn't start referring to and like naming a sense of the being of the course until probably we started really scaffolding the curriculum, which we'll be talking about shortly. But I do think, I don't know, I kind of just got this mystical wave that like it's been with us all along, which is pretty powerful. Because we have been so rapidly, radically passing this back and forth. It's just feels almost like this is part of why we know each other or something.
Mm-hmm.
It feels that powerful to me.
Yeah, it feels that powerful to me too. Definitely. Mm-hmm. And I remember, it's interesting to think about how these concepts, right, are not just concepts that we birth into the world or like, ways of being or ways of looking at things that we birth into the world, but they also birth us through them being in the world, And I remember early on, like there was this sense of like, oh, what is it? And it's more kind of this playful way of like, well, maybe we'll collaborate, maybe we won't collaborate, But then I think as we deepen into it, you're right. Maybe like when we finally start nailing down the the curriculum, it does feel so much like, oh, well, it's already here.
Yes.
It's like, how can we not do this now?
So there it is.
There it is.
Oh, and what's so amazing about that is like literally it feels to me like, oh, okay, why don't we just show up for that? That just like there it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
You also I don't know, downloaded you you came up with this incredible invitation for us to ask the cardinal signs, which are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, to support us in building the container.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to pause for a minute to just name, like, why am I using this word container instead of class or course? I'm not really sure when I began referring to courses and classes as containers. Even a workshop can be a container, like so many things can be a container, right?
Yeah, reading space.
I really like the container idea because it really underlines the sense of like there being borders or boundaries that are holding a space, and it's like fortified, it's intact. A container has like a clear beginning and a clear ending.
Yeah.
So that like everybody knows timing wise, like there's an arc and there's waves that move around in the space through those containers. Much can happen, can be very watery in a container, but the container itself is that feeling of being held. And I think that it's a really powerful word then for whatever it is that then happens for someone alchemically inside of a learning space.
Yeah.
What would you add anything to that or shift it?
I think what I would add to it is, for me, as a pretty Capricornian person, it's easy to think about container as just like that physical thing, right? Like the curriculum being like, what we talk about, like what are the topics in the syllabus, right? To me also, there's maybe a bit of a distinction between the curriculum and like the syllabus, because to me the curriculum has more of like a soul to it. The syllabus is just like, what are we going to talk about in this class, right? It's very matter of fact.
Yes.
And I think when we think about structures or we think about containers, often we think about like, how many times is this class meeting in 1 week? What are we going to be talking about this? What are we going to be talking about within this class, right? Or things that are very mundane, which I think is beautiful and is part of it. But also to me, container has so much more to it. Like there is energetic container. There is kind of personal will container. There is relational container, right? So what I thought about when we were starting to talk about the container was not just what we want to teach people, like in terms of the content, but almost like how do we want to teach people? And what are some of the needs that we need to come to personally for ourselves as well as a team? Like what are the needs that we have that we need to first acknowledge for ourselves, and then to maybe consider whether we want to be upfront about it or not upfront about it, within the container. Because I think something I experienced too from collaborating with you, being your TA last year, is that when you facilitate, you also have needs.
Yes.
And it does nobody good to pretend that you don't have needs.
Yes. 100%.
The teacher, the facilitator is not this ATM for learning, right? But often, because that's how we've been taught in our culture, in our educational system, in the colonial system, we think that we need to be this robot. Like we need to show up not as our squishy human self, And so this, to me, like thinking about containers seen through the lens of Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, and Libra, it's really about being very honest with ourselves about some of the things that are needed. So I'm going to give a little bit of an example here, right? So the Capricorn structure is to me about that rigor, that discipline, that very material structure, right? Of like, when are we going to meet? Let's make it the same time every week, right? And then how long should meetups be? Because meetups that don't have end times are not good for people. You know, it doesn't feel good to just kind of continue going on and on and on and like be like, okay, do I then now have to block out the rest of my day for this thing?
Yes.
You know? And it's like, how long will this container last, right? And finally,
Yeah.
like, how much do we need to charge in order for us to survive as human beings living in this world?
Mhm.
And considering too that we have a container that has two facilitators, right? Which means that, yes, it will probably be very beneficial for people to have two different voices, you know, sharing, facilitating for them. And we both need to have our needs met too, you know? And then like thinking about Cancer structures, right? Cancer to me relates to care. What energetic boundaries need to be present, you know? We had stumbled upon or maybe began doing this thing, Britten, where before our work meetings, we start with like a little bit of an energetic hygiene kind of little ritual that only takes like 5 to 10 minutes, but it makes a huge difference. You know, I feel like the space is so much clearer, right? And you know, how do we want to protect and nourish the energetic psychic bodies of us and our students, you know? And what do we need to be explicit about with regards to our like kind of the underlying philosophy that we want to share with our students in order to make sure that we can approach astrology with a lot of clarity, with a lot of confidence, with this capacity to receive abundance, right? For the gifts that astrology is here to share with us. Yeah. Do you feel like sharing about the Aries and Libra containers too? Or you want me to do it?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Aries structures. I like your use of the word vitality for Aries. So then what you asked us to think about is, what do I want out of this experience? How can I grow in my own journey? And here you're referring to you and me as the teachers,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
as the space holders. And it's taken me a really long time to not see and like completely unashamedly own that how my body feels about the spaces I want to hold or carry or create needs to be central to the creation of those spaces. And it's really important, because if we're not moving from that vital place of excitement, of being impressed with each other, of just feeling really like, I want to do this and I can't wait to be there on a weekly basis, you know, then that's going to be felt energetically in the container.
Totally.
And then Libra structures, relationality here. How can I learn with others? How can I cultivate skills, tactics, practices to always remember my inherent relationality to other people, to the planets, and to the world around me? And I think this is extremely important, because we're talking about a relational space.
Yeah.
We're talking about community. Like one of the first conversations that we had about astrology as praxis was us realizing that the most interesting aspect of astrology in many ways is how it brings people together into community. And that this idea of creating community with the language of astrology being central to what we're doing, and thus getting really clear around our like how we're showing up relationally being central to the energetics of the container.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, cardinal signs.
Yeah, thank you, cardinal signs. And it's also interesting because I think, thinking about like Libra structures, right? There are ways of learning astrology that are outside of communal containers, and that's totally valid too. And I know that you, for example, Britten, like really was an autodidact at first. Like you really got all these books and you learned from these books, and I think that's such an important way to learn, and that's something that I think maybe we should also consider, teaching in the container. Like, how do you learn from just the books? When you are done with this container, how can you make that process as nice and as beautiful for yourself as possible?
Yes. My first Libran containers were my clients.
Yeah.
And we're building, we'll get to that, but we're building space holding for participants in the curriculum.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just group relationality, but there will be one-on-one relationality that's part of the container.
Yes, exactly. And I think the beauty about learning astrology within a communal container is that when I was learning astrology, I kept finding myself magnetized to containers, and now I'm starting to realize why. I mean, a lot of it is in my chart, right? Like Sun in 7th house, Jupiter in the 11th, of course, At the same time, also, something about astrology is not a dead knowledge. It's not just like, here are the keywords, memorize them, and then you're off on your way, right? It's really kind of a practice of being in conversation with other beings, And so practicing these conversational skills within a container where you are held, where, I no longer like to use the word safe spaces, because I don't think that any space is really safe, because that feeling of safety is something that only you can cultivate for yourself, But I do think that in containers, there's an energetic contract of being held, and there are opportunities where reparations are possible, right? If somebody was hurt by something that somebody said or the way that somebody handled things, there are opportunities to kind of move away from that, or kind of figure out, like, what can we do to make this right?
Yeah.
To make this feel good again, right? And I think that's such an important and valuable skill to have.
Yes. Well said. Yeah. Right. So do you want to jump into talking about curriculum?
Let's do it.
Like the real deal?
The real deal.
Let's see. Let's talk about why, Jonathan, do we have a part 1 and part 2? I feel like pretty early on, we started to vision this idea of compressing and basically intensifying the process of getting through the basic vocabulary of astrology, so that we could move on to the really the juicy part of having those conversations.
Yeah.
Now, I do think when you're learning astrology, the learning of the vocabulary is also extremely juicy, right? It's not that it's not fun or juicy or exciting. It's just like it's a little bit different set of parts of self that are engaging with learning. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true. I would also add to that the fact that I think this was really coming from my own personal way of learning, which is that I like to learn things pretty fast. When I have a lot of excitement about a certain topic, I want to just gobble it up, and then often that is really hard because I also fall into rabbit holes, right? If let's say I want to learn about Saturn, I started listening to a 4-hour podcast episode on Saturn, and then I find 10 more episodes on Saturn, and then before I know it, the whole month I'm only listening to things Saturn related, right? And that's, I think, incredible, amazing, and in 2022 can happen in your own time, right? To me, when we're in a container, it's important to find the right pace. And to me, the right pace is, first of all, to understand that this learning, right, that when you're learning the building blocks of astrology, it's not going to happen in one go.
No,
You know, I'm about to teach an astrology course now, and I still go back to those building blocks. To me, they're so essential, and every single time you go back to them, you find something new. And so my hope is to impart a way of learning that, rather than thinking of it linearly as, okay, I didn't know anything before, and then I learned, I listened to the lessons and now I know everything, right? Rather than considering it like that, I want people to understand that learning is a spiral. And so you're going to see it the first time and you're going to be like, okay, cool, right? You got whatever you needed to get out of it at that moment, and then you move on to the next topic, right? But knowing that later on, you're going to re-encounter those topics, and when you re-encounter those topics, it's going to hit different.
Yes. Yeah, we were thinking one of the visual analogies that we had at this time was like you're going to go sightseeing, like you're going to Paris, this exotic new place, astrology is exotic new language, and like, let's first just like drive around everywhere and like get the lay of the land, and as it goes, you may be like, wait, I'm confused. What was that? Some of it may run together. It's like maybe for some people happening too fast, and like, this is fine. Because turns out we're going to like live here for a while, and we're just going to move neighborhoods like now and then to, get to know the different pockets. And like, you're going to totally know all these places. Like, don't even worry if you forgot the name. I do think it's in that part one, there's a lot of things that students can be holding in their hands. They're like holding in the hands, like the thrill, the excitement, the hunger, and there can also be the frustration with the learning process, because learning is intense. Like, it's rapidly changing you on every level. Like, it's not just intellectual,
Exactly. And I think also our experience last year with facilitating charting your course really taught me something, which is that learning happens both when people are listening to the lessons, as well as when they come to meetups and read each other's charts, right? When they read the chart of the moment, when they allow themselves to speak up and almost like, I don't even know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to let this out, right? I think fluency is built that way. We often talk about astrology as a language, and I think in order for us to be able to speak a language, we need to apply it. We need to make mistakes. We need to have another person's perspective, because it's like, for me, for example, English is my second language. And I realized that when I started listening to podcasts, the way I talk changed dramatically, because I start to hear how other people talk, right? And I start to find, how do I want to say things? Or how do I want to let things move through me in ways that I probably, that wasn't super accessible to me when I was just chatting with certain friends in my little community. So my point being that I think when I think about how we've designed this curriculum, to me, it's actually pretty radical, because we're allowing part one, right, which is learning the language of astrology, the basic blocks of astrology within 4 months. And then part two is going to be 8 months, right? Part two is going to be where we explore astrology as praxis. And each month we're going to have different portals into astrology. So maybe 1 month we have astrology as embodiment practice. Another one we have astrology as creative practice. And I think what I'm feeling into is also like my inner student here, right? As you mentioned, Britten, I actually haven't been teaching for very long, but I have been a student forever. And so what I do know that I want is I want to have a container where I feel like that exploration of questioning things, right? Of maybe not agreeing with certain ways that we talk about astrology, or maybe seeing new things that are emerging and not really sure if that was a figment of my imagination or if it was a real thing. I want that to happen within a container.
Mm-hmm.
I want there to be a container to hold me through that process. And also, as I mentioned to you in our voice memo the other day, there's also a moment in learning where the students start to rebel against the teacher. And to me, this is like a really exciting place to be. And often there's not an overt invitation or a normalization that, yes, this is what's supposed to happen. Because you're making it make sense for you, and how it makes sense for you is going to be different than how it makes sense for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And often it just becomes a conflict, right? Or it becomes like, I don't know, like an animosity. And then we just, are left lingering with this energy of like, oh, but I don't agree with my teacher, but we didn't actually have a chance to face hash that out with the facilitators.
Yeah.
And I think that's really sad, because to me, going back to that relationality part, right? The best juice in life came from relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Or can come from relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like part one, since it also has an opening and a closing weekend, it will have like its own sense of being a mini container, right? Like it's kind of a mini container within the container, and we are like diving in, we're together, we're creating bonds and relationship with one another. We're practicing, we're feeling super foolish. We're laughing about it. We're starting to come up with like ways to chat with one another that make us smile and help us feel comfortable with one another. And we're like really getting at some solid basics with the language.
Yes.
And I think that like intermediate people who already know astrology will also love part one, because we're coming at it from this like we're coming from it not like we're saying everything there is to say about these things. We're saying we're pointing to what's alive to teach at that given day that we give the lessons, and pointing to like a whole resource bank to fill in the blanks. And the way you and I might talk about Mercury may be very different than anyone's heard it before. And that's how you grow your own facility and your love for the language, is I think talking with one another.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm really feeling into as well is that, rather than thinking of them as lessons, right? These are really like transmissions from our shared space. It's more like, okay, Jonathan and Britten has been studying, struggling, playing with astrology for some time. Like, what wants to come through today? Rather than like, here's what we think about Saturn forever and ever. Amen.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm really excited about the sweetness of part one. And I don't see it as like, let's just drudge through, like push on through the hard part, like so we can get to the conversations. Like I think it's going to have like a really zesty electricity to it.
Yes.
How
yes, I agree.
I imagine part two will have a much more kind of like, just like a different vibe, but of course we won't know till we're inside of it.
Yeah, exactly. And something I want to share too about part one is really, for those of you who are more like, so what are you going to exactly talk about in part one? It's really, we're talking about the building blocks of astrology, right? So we're going to be talking about the planets, the signs, the houses, and then aspects, other points or other bodies, astrological bodies that we use in our own practice. And then we're going to end it with a weekend where we do a bit of a synthesis, right? Of like, here's how you read transits, here's how you read charts, and then have time to practice that with each other in that closing weekend. However, since this is astrology as praxis, something that we've been talking about and thinking about is also to create opportunities for participants to talk with one another outside of meetups, during every week, because every week we're going to be talking about an archetype, or we're going to be talking about a particular technique maybe, and really see what comes up, not just for you but another person in the class, and to be able to share those insights. Because to me, learning astrology happens both by looking at your chart also by looking at another person's chart, because there's an objectivity that we often don't have when we're looking at another person's chart, and there's a subjectivity that obviously is not present when we are looking at another person's chart. So it is, to me, important to kind of balance the both and of like, yes, maybe we can play around with our own charts, but also play around with another person's chart. And then, in my very nonlinear way, also the opening weekend to me is about like setting the foundation, and Britten and I really sharing like, what are some of the things that you need to know about learning astrology from a very macro level.
Yes, and also an opportunity for people to share why they're there, what their intentions are, how they got to the place, because it helps one's body to relax into learning when we feel like we've been able to hear other people that we're with and say something about ourselves. I feel something really magical when you share why you want to learn astrology. I personally just like eat up listening to people share.
Yes.
So yeah, part one.
Do you feel complete with part one?
I feel good. I think I feel good with part one.
Okay, cool. So now let's talk about part two.
And we'll have like 3 some weeks. So we'll have a little like, whew, okay. Until part 2 begins. So there can be a little rest.
Yeah. Which is very important for integration as well.
Yes, exactly. So part 2, we began thinking about the structure of, okay, so we're looking at 8 months, January to August, ways to organize. And it was you that came up with us. We had talked about bringing in the elements, but it was you that created the earth to fire, or fire back to earth setup, which is a reflection of a curriculum I had designed for another one of my containers.
Yeah.
And love it because it feels very homey to me.
Exactly. Yeah, I was really thinking about, okay, if we have 8 months, then what are we going to do with this? And then it was just like, aha, the Magician's Table also had basically 8 modules, of like each one being corresponding to a particular element, right? So earth, water, air, fire. And then in the Magician's Table, you also then go back into fire, air, water, earth. And also the way you had designed Magician's Table, which is such a great curriculum, by the way.
Thank you.
I love it. Is that the first part, right? First rodeo of like earth to fire is about personal practices, and then fire to earth later the second time was more of a public practice. So I kind of wanted to bring this in a little bit as well, like have a little bit of that flavor of like the first 4 months really kind of working with the elements. I'm not going to make it super tight container, but it is more or less much more like, how does it move through you as a human being living in like your body? And then the last 4 months is really going to be like, how do we then become this being that can participate with the cosmic body, Well, actually, I should amend that. I should say we're already always participating in the cosmic body, but can we now bring more awareness to our participation in the cosmic body?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think listeners, you probably are all aware of this, but I want to just be clear that the reason we have the elements here is because the elements are some of the most basic parts of astrology, and that each of the signs is assigned to an element. And there is so much food to be had in just relating with the elements as an astrologer. I found. So, and I just find that starting and ending with Earth is just really yummy and nourishing. Just feels really good to begin with groundedness and end that way. So I think everyone will really enjoy the vibrational aspect of moving through the elements in those orders.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's just so important to think about beginnings and endings with containers. And the Earth signs are going to be our dear friends in helping us do that in the ways that will support us the most.
Yeah.
Yes. So then it was like, okay, what do we do from there? Like, what themes should we bring in?
Yeah.
I think I came up with this idea on like a WhatsApp riff on this idea of ways in. Was that around when?
Yeah. So when I first kind of sat down with the ideas, it was just more like, okay, what didn't I mean, in my, simplistic, maybe not simplistic, but like in my Gemini moon brain, it's like, okay, what are the things that I would love to hear talked about that either I never really got when I was studying astrology, or was maybe didn't really fit into the first 4 months, right? Because the first 4 months, part 1 is going to be very linear in some ways, right? And then part 2 is more like, okay, what are the other techniques that we can bring in, or the other frameworks that we can bring in order to make the stuff in the first 4 months make more sense in a way, right? Or like, what are the exciting ways to revisit that and not just kind of like, okay, now we're going to do part 1 all over again, which is like, nah, that would be boring, right? So I think what I had done was originally I had just started putting all these different topics inside each of the containers, and I was like, Britten, help, I don't know what to do with this. And then you had mentioned, about this ways in, and then I remember too, and maybe you reminded me, at this point everything is very much like this is the happy kind of merging. The voluntary merging.
We're really going collective at this point.
At this point we're going collective, where I was like, oh, remember you had also named your modules portals in charting your course. And so what if we essentially allow each month to be a portal to different ways of learning about astrology? And then from then, I feel like it was pretty quickly we just got.
It was like do.
Yeah. Yes, and I remember waking up. I think it was like a Sunday, and then you had added to the document like these different, or maybe you had sent me a picture
of my journal,
of your journal, and I was like, "That's it, we're done. That's the one."
Yeah. In addition to like techniques that we hadn't yet talked about, or topics we hadn't yet talked about, or like ways people talk about astrology that you hadn't seen or I hadn't seen fit into astrology foundations classes. I think we were also thinking about like ways astrology was moving through our own lives that like we felt like, why aren't we talking about this in astrology classes,
Exactly.
And so then it was like, it's like, what are the ways in to talking about astrology and as a practice? And then it was just like, the elements said to me, you know, each of the 8 could be a astrology as blank practice inspired by that element, covering, and we could find ways to cover all these sprawling things that we wanted to bring in and fit them under each of these modules. And so thus each of these 8 modules, it could itself be like its own world, you know?
Yeah.
Each one is so expansive as like a starting point. It's a way in, like the idea of like the kind of teacher, space holder, guide I want to be is like, come over here. Like, this is a really cool way in. Let me show you. Let me get you used to it. How do you feel? Are you comfortable? Do you have everything you need? Like, okay, go. Like, and like, as long as you feel good from here, like, did I get you the right resources for your backpack? You know? And then like, it's a whole world that people can go into, and some of those modules will resonate maybe more than others. I think each one is going to be just like so good.
Yeah.
I don't know how I could pick favorites.
Yeah.
Want to go through them?
I would love that. And also, as you were saying that, Britten, I remember that that rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Yeah, I feel I'm getting an image of you being that kind of facilitator. And you're like portal openers, you know?
Down here.
Welcome to this portal. It's right here. Yes, exactly.
Eat this, drink this.
Yeah. Okay, so month 1. So this is going to be in January. We're going to be looking at Earth, or we're going to be creating a relationship with Earth, and the theme is astrology as embodiment practice.
Yeah. Feeling into how to, like, there's different topics, right? And we're going to like introduce the ways in with always our opening lesson. But one of the things that I usually do when I have a container is offer people daily practices that I suggest. And what we both intuited was that part 1 was just needed to really be an intensive to get into the language, and that this can be where we introduce daily practices, embodiment practices, rhythmic ways to be in connection to astrology as a living being, to ground your relationship with astrology and with each other.
Yes.
What else would you say about that month?
Well, something that really was very heart-opening for me was one of the participants in last year's Charting Your Course, Mary Shook, which is a dear friend of mine, told me the other day that learning astrology with us, like Jonathan and Britten, really helped her feel astrology in her body. Like feeling the transit in her body. And I really, really appreciate that, because I think for some folks, not everyone, again, you know, all of these ways in, you don't have to get an A in all of them, right? Some of them you may be like, that was interesting. What an interesting experiment. Next, right? But for some people, this is really big. And I'm even seeing, you know, that I think there's some amazing humans out there doing, you know, astrology as embodiment practice. The person I'm thinking about is Renee Sills. It's just incredible, you know. And also someone recently who came into my field of awareness is Cameron Allen, also doing a lot of really fabulous things with regards to astrology as, you know, a portal into the body, right? Maybe the birth chart as a way to practice getting to really know your own body. And what you also were talking about, Britten, are things like, you know, maybe checking transits, right, daily, and kind of feeling into like how is what is going on in my body correlated with the transit, right? Or how do I ground what I'm feeling through expressing it by looking at the chart?
Yes. and everyone will find their own things here, you know. Many people know that I'm a big journaling nerd, so much so I create workbooks for people to journal in with their relationship with astrology. And I have many people that I know that absolutely love this, and it's not for everyone. And so it's not like we're only going to be sharing our own, you know, it's an invitation to learn from one another. And this was where we wanted to bring in Chiron, since Chiron's not in part one, because Chiron is just such an incredible teacher about connecting us to the relationality between plants and planets.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also thinking about Chiron, as like the wisdom teacher, right? Some people who know me know that I am, I love my meditation practice. And also this is, I think, where we can bring in meditation as an embodiment practice and also bring in astrology.
Yes, those are going to be really fun sessions.
Yeah. Cool. How do you feel about moving on?
Wonderful.
Okay. So month 2 is water, and the theme for month 2 is astrology as healing practice.
Yeah. And this is where we thought about introducing working with cycles, the lunar cycle, perhaps, thinking about how healing our relationship to time can be one of the most deeply supportive ways that we can have a relationship practice with astrology for healing. The moon also opens up a lot in terms of spiritual and emotional reparenting. There are other celestial bodies that we might want to bring in at this time, such as Aries or Lilith. We're still fine-tuning all those little details, but it will be a rich time to cover, at least for me, one of the most powerful ways that I personally am in praxis with astrology, which is to help support my own self-healing and also the healing that I have in relationships with others, and the things that I've learned from helping other people, clients, students, with healing in their own lives through their charts and through astrology.
Yeah, exactly. Something that I'm realizing the deeper I get into the practice of astrology is also how astrology itself is inherently healing. As a symbolic language, it has such potency in helping us describe our inner realities. And I think that process of translating this inner landscape into words, knowing that there are words to describe it, right? Like, oh, I have my Mars profected here, can be deeply healing, because then that part of you is really seen, and we had also talked about reparenting ourselves, which is a big topic. And reparenting doesn't have to mean that your parents did a bad job, right? But it's just like filling in the gaps, and really feeling into how you can show up for yourself and your inner child. And yeah, so that's a very exciting month. And probably I can bet my money that there will be some tears.
Yes.
Yeah. So month 3 then is air. And we're going to be talking about astrology as intellectual practice. So this is maybe where we're going to be introducing, I think, a lot of concepts and a lot of frameworks that are maybe more traditionally, when you think about signing up for an astrology course, this is what people think about, that they're getting as part of their exchange, which is, a bunch of different techniques like the lunar phases, planetary combinations, progressions, talking about Saturn return, nodal transits, annual profections, or timing techniques just in general, like feeling into like which timing techniques Britten and I have used over time and how we relate to them. Something I should say about this is that to me, it's really interesting to be introduced to these techniques and to also right up front, like be very transparent that techniques take a really long time to integrate, like way longer than we would want it to. And I've seen this with my own study where I'm like, oh, I'm still figuring things out, in terms of technical knowledge, because it's like something about how astrology is to me is like, and in this month, what we're really exploring is like the ways in which astrology is heady, right? And kind of has that brainy aspect to it. And that still doesn't absolve one from the process of really kind of getting down into the nitty-gritty and figuring out how to talk about certain things.
Yeah. I think like the way I'm kind of seeing it is like this kind of Gemini space of like being like a busy bee, like popping to different flowers and tasting things and like giving yourself enough of an idea that like if somebody says perfections, you're not like deer in the headlights, I have no idea what you're talking about, like you've learned enough that you can like let it sit in your back pocket. You can start attuning yourself to get more information. You can actually go sign up for other things that will focus on those things in much deeper ways. Really just a way of like, especially for the part of us that loves learning, like we're just going to dive into all kinds of fun learning. And maybe do study groups and just have fun with it.
Exactly.
Do you want to move to fire?
Let's do it. So month 4 is fire. Astrology as creative practice. Well, I'm super excited about this one. Yeah. Something that I've wanted to explore for a while is what will it look like if in community we explore various artistic practice. I feel like people who are drawn to astrology are at least poets.
I love that.
Yeah, like if nothing else, if you're like, no, I'm not a creative person, well, first of all, I will have a lot of arguments to help you get rid of that idea, because I think all of us are artists. And also, if you can talk, you can write, and it's like maybe write 3 lines of poetry. You can write a haiku, or some people here might really want to explore, creating large scale paintings, or create music, do erotica. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah, let's see. I think that's going to be a really juicy month.
Yeah.
And it will potentially be ones that some people will be really afraid of, and some people will be really anticipating with excitement. And we're just going to get messy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'm even thinking, some people may be interested in art more as a spectator. And, you can do an art history study.
Yeah.
And you have Britten to give you some pointers. Or like a survey of, pop music and try to think about different artists who correlate with different signs and different planets.
I love that. So many ways we can go, and we will help everyone feel excited and informed about a way into this.
Exactly. Yes. And in month 5, we're going to be doing fire again. And this one is astrology as alchemical practice. So I'm actually curious, Britten. I'm curious what's coming up for you around that topic.
Yeah, when I felt into that one. I wanted there to be something here that felt like magic,
Hmm.
really overtly alchemical. How astrology can help you change the form of things into something else, and what are the ingredients for that? Perhaps burning through fear, perhaps like turning a story into compost to become the ingredients for the next thing you're going to grow. I have a very magical relationship with astrology, and so I'm excited to just play around in that space with people and really lean into the support we can receive from astrology for bringing change into our lives that
Mm-hmm.
we feel excited about.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I think also um this is, to me, there's a bit of a correlation with astrology as healing practice, because it is also healing, but maybe healing through fire,
Yeah.
rather than healing through water. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, what does it mean to transmute and to, um, yeah, to work with things that feel sticky to us? Like, I feel like this is a perfect month to maybe even be bringing things like, I am interested in starting an astrology practice, but I'm afraid of being seen, or
Mm-hmm.
I love this practice so much, but I am afraid of what people are going to say when they find out that I'm actually interested in astrology. Will my friends think I'm crazy? Will my family disown me? Things like that. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Working with Venus to shift scarcity, in relating. There's all kinds of things that we can do.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to learn from everybody, because I just already see it, that it's going to be a space where people really share some pretty fabulous insights that want to move through them.
Hmm. Yeah. And also, I should reveal too that Britten and I have this intention, this dream of bringing in guest teachers for at
Yeah.
least some of these months, if not all of them. And it's going to be so amazing.
Yeah.
So amazing. I'm already, actually, a few people have said yes, and I'm going to keep their names secret for now for mystery. For the sake of mystery. It's like, yes, there are some really incredible astrologers that are going to be coming and chatting with us, or whatever they want to present, really, in,
Mhm.
in part two. Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe in part one, too.
That's correct.
Yeah. Cool. So, month 6, we're coming to a close, and we're going to be.
Already. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so in month 6, we're going to be talking about air again, and we're going to be talking about astrology as trickster practice. And so, to me, this is a very, very rich month. Like, I'm
Oh, yeah.
already like, I can't wait for this month, because it's like so much juicy conversations around like what essentially, right? My Gemini moon gets super excited about this. It's like, how can we rewrite the history of astrology? Or how can we rewrite astrology? Because, in a way, to me, any and all wisdom tradition needs to grow alongside us as humans. And so, how do we make this make sense for us in 2022? So, yeah, this is really the time where when we're going to be interrogating paradigms, smashing old ways of thinking, breaking things down that we've learned, right? And I have this dream. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I have this dream of creating a class dictionary where we all almost create like a Word document or like a spreadsheet where we bring in really new and juicy keywords for each of the building blocks of astrology that then will become a communal resource, so that by the time people are done with this container, you have that resource that was built just within that container by people who were in that container.
Yes. And like, what are the planetary allies for um, demolishing old altars anywhere in our
Yeah.
lives, not
Yeah.
just in astrology. Like
Yeah.
um, which ones do we invite to come hang out with us when we want to lean into more disobedience or resistance or refusal, where we know that it is supportive to the vision of the future and the now that we want to see here.
Yes. 100%. Month 7 is water, astrology as ancestral practice. So to me, this is interesting because I think this brings up a lot for people, especially in the current climate we're in. And personally, I don't see ancestral practice as just being about my human lineage. To me, ancestors are any and all that came before us. And so, you know, a museum that was here before I is my ancestor. You know, the trees are my ancestors. Certain birds are my ancestors. And also at the same time, I think it could be really an exciting exploration if some folks are up for it to feel into like, okay, what part of my human ancestry practice some forms of astrology, and maybe begin doing some exploration around that and exploring, ancestral practice is so fraught. And I think that, bringing in different perspectives can really help ease some of the tension that is, that can be really palpably felt when we're talking about anything ancestrally related.
Yes. A rich, rich month. The water months will roll through us.
Yeah.
And we will feel glad for a sturdy container.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And then the final month is Earth again, and it's astrology as integration practice. So, what I'm feeling into for this month is maybe thinking about what it means to take all that we've learned and begin implementing it in our lives, right? In whatever ways feel exciting. Because some people may want to do this professionally, like as in give readings. Some people may want to incorporate astrology into their creative practice, and some others may be, energy healers who just wants to have, astrology as a background knowledge. But I think really I think that the invitation for this month is around how do you make it make sense for you, and what have you learned here, and what are you still excited to learn in the future? What do you still need more resources to learn? Because the learning never ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it's not a month to bring in anything new. It's a month for integration, being together, and we even talked about this idea of closure as a practice and practicing closure together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Because it will have been then a whole year together.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be a lot that comes up, relief, sadness, all kinds of things around the end. And we're just going to give it lots of love and tending and also pragmatic support.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sharing tips with each other around like what has worked in, practice readings, right? What hasn't worked in practice readings. I think this is also the time for that. And that may be interesting for those who are interested in having their own professional practice.
Yes. That's something we said about part 1, but part 2, the partnerings will continue. It will be just a slow process of feeling more and more comfortable being with another person with another chart. Of course, these can be in any channel of communication. They don't have to be in Zoom. They can be in WhatsApp. They can be in DMs. They can be by email. Being with another human in their chart does not have to happen face to face in Zoom or in person.
Yeah.
So these will look different every week, I imagine, every month. But by the time you will have finished a whole year, you will have looked at a lot of charts and spent a lot of time across from another human being talking about astrology. So that month will be beautiful for really feeling into like, what do I like talking about? Like, what does it seem like people want to talk to me about when I'm looking at their chart? What's not me? What is me? Or like, maybe I'm not into charts. Maybe I just really like hanging out with planets, like, or like,
Right.
maybe I don't want to hold space, but I want to like write and like create content that people can engage with. And this will be when everyone's really feeling into these questions and letting themselves be witnessed.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we did it, Britten.
We did it. That was a large one.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of all that we've created here.
I'm super excited. I cannot wait to see how, having more people in the space with us is going to change the body of astrology as praxis. I mean, you and I talk about how even having a conversation the other day with one of our TAs is already changing something about how we are thinking about this,
Yeah.
and changing the ways that maybe we interact with this curriculum, which again is like alive, and will be alive through us. And yeah, I think that's what's so fun about learning in community, because like it won't be the same, even if you and I end up doing this for the next 50 years, it will not be the same, each time will be different.
Yes. I feel like we're the two we're the first receivers of the information, and then it will just it's in the nature of astrology as praxis to be inclusive enough of anyone who wants to come to it and let itself be formed by them too,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So fun.
Aww.
Thank you for this whole experience of creation, and can't wait to see everyone inside.
Yeah, I can't wait either. Thank you, Britten. This has been so lovely. That's it for my conversation with Britten. I hope that you found something interesting, something shifting, and also if you are feeling called to astrology as praxis and you need to maybe sit down and have a conversation with me just to feel if there's any resonance, I would definitely love to do that. Registration is open next week, right? So, get on my calendar as soon as possible if that's something that's calling to you. If you found this podcast to be exciting, to be useful to you, helpful in some way, I would love to receive a review or a 5-star rating on your podcast app or whatever is the highest ranking. And if you feel like anybody will benefit from listening to this conversation or in being in astrology as praxis, then I welcome you to share this episode with them and send them our way. Okay, until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.